Okay, welcome to my newest video. In this video, I want to talk about the Keris Majapahit. Everybody knows Majapahit. Majapahit is actually the golden time of Indonesia, in what Indonesia was actually the ruler from a very large area in Southeast Asia. We speak from Thailand, going down to Malaysia, Sumatra, Java, of course, Bali, Lombok, Sulawesi, up to the Philippines. And very important was not really a king, but a general, Gajah Mada. Gajah Mada, we don't know much about Gajah Mada. We know that he was a part of an elite group of fighters. We don't know his father, we don't know his mother, but he worked himself up to not only the general of the beginning of Majapahit, but he was also the, how you can say it, consigliere. He was the one who gives advice to the king, and it's a mythical person, King Gajah Mada. It's well known that, let's say that the modern Keris is probably created in the beginning of Majapahit, and then not beginning time, let's say 1290, but 3020. That was the time when General Gajah Mada was actually the ruler of Indonesia. So let's say 1320 to 3060, around that time. So let's say the first quarter until the half of Majapahit. That's the beginning of the modern Keris. If you go back in time, let's start with the word Keris Majapahit. A lot of Keris Petut Sajen, Keris like this, they call it Keris Majapahit. Majapahit also is the name for something old, and actually this is a Keris Sajen, so you offer for this Keris and you make wishes for those Keris. This is an old one, but I don't know if it's really, because it has some pamor on it. I don't know if it is really a Keris from Majapahit, but it's an old one. The first thing what you notice on a Keris Majapahit is the form, the way the looks are made. It's just like dancing. It's dancing of the waves, if you look at it. It has a little pamor on it. You can see some pamor, but not a lot of pamor. And that's what you see in the beginning of time of Majapahit, that the Keris from that time, they have pamor, but not across the complete blade of the Keris. And if you look carefully, because of washing, you can see that it is a little bit three-dimensional. The pamor is on the blade. And that's a very big remark of Keris from Majapahit. The gonjo is small. It has a small gonjo, and the point of the gonjo kind of goes to the front. That's the second thing. So you've got three things on how to recognize a real Keris. Know that there are more of them, but I want to speak about three of them. The first one, small gonjo going to the front. First thing. Second thing, the pamor. Not a lot of pamor, and the pamor is on the blade. And the third thing for Majapahit Keris, if you look at the curves, it's like dancing, you know. Look how beautiful the empu made the curves of the blade. Well, Keris from Majapahit are very much appreciated. And for instance, for Javanese people like me, it's very important, because the most magical Keris come from Majapahit era. But it also means that in the time, let's say from 1750, 1850, the time 1900, let's say, when Groneman supported the empus, a lot of replicas were made. It was also a trend at the time to make old kris, but they are replicas. So it means actually that also from that time, you see kris that are already 250 years old, who look exactly like the kris from Majapahit, but they're replica kris made in a later time. But this is a real old one. Okay. Well, in the beginning of the Majapahit time, you see something strange. Right now, the pesi is made from the same material as the blade. But in the beginning, they made the pesi like in this kris. And you can see very clearly right now that the pesi is attached inside the blade, as if it has fallen inside of the blade. The word of fallen in Indonesian, and a lot of words in Indonesian, I would call them onomatopoeia. So it means that the sound has something to do with the word. Well, when you drop down, they say ceblok, ceblok. This is called pesi Ceblokan, as if it has fallen inside of the blade. And they did it to give much more magical power to the blade. Well, you can see again a little bit of palmer over here. Protection against black magic. It's not over the whole blade, and if you look at the form of the look, of course, something of the point is missing, but this is a very old one. It's from the beginning of Majapahit, and you can see it on the attachment of the pesi, what's called pesi Ceblokan. They say that pesi Ceblokan is made by empu Jigja. Empu Jigja. And empu Jigja was an empu in the beginning time of Majapahit. What I like very much is the very old grip, you know, this grip. You can see it's from the Muslim time already, you see. It has all the influences of a Muslim grip. So when did Muslims start in Indonesia? Well, let's say end of Majapahit, so 1500, 1450, 1500. And then you've got the time of Sultan Agung Mataram. Personally, what a lot of people say is that the most beautiful kris are made in the period from Mataram. But I like those very old blades, you know. Pesi Ceblokan. And it's not strange that a lot of old kris from East Java are kris from Majapahit, because the pesi, what is actually a lingam, we're talking about the time that Indonesia was Hindu-Buddhist, you know. And the pesi, the lingam, is attached to the blade. Also the mark of Mount Kailash, Semeru, or the Mount Meru. You've got a part of the Mount Semeru that has been brought to Java. And it's like magnetic. So it means that kris like this, they're the most powerful. That's why they make the attachment of the pesi like this. It's to give much more power to the kris. And well, I respect kris very much. The best kris are always sleeping. And if you read the old books, they do not feel the energy of the kris constantly, the best Chris are sleeping and suddenly they could wake up. So I always respect the Chris, because you never know. At one certain point, it could be that you're doing something or that you are using some kind of oil and suddenly the Chris wakes up. So I always respect the Chris, also the Chris where I feel nothing with it, because the best Chris are actually waiting for the time to awake. So the Chris, especially in the time of Majapahit, were the best and most powerful Chris, and that's why for Wong Jawa, Majapahit is very important. Well, here you've got another Chris Majapahit. Again, you can see the pesi going zip forward, you see? And you see some pamor on the gonjo. And if you go up, you can see that it is something like bulu ayam or rongganduru, a very high Chris, actually normally used by the noble people, the priyaji of Java. If you look at the shape again, it's as if the Chris is dancing. About the look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 look. And oh yeah, there you go. For instance, the mandak over here. You see, it's an old mandak. It has been bent. But this is a pusaka. And for a pusaka, I don't like to take a risk that something happens. So I don't wash it a lot, because I want this to look like metal and not like charcoal. What you see a lot of Chris, they make them very black and it looks not like metal, it's look burnt. And Chris like that, you know, they become kosong and the energy goes away when you've got a Chris kosong, you know. Again, very old Majapahit blade. It doesn't have the attachment of the pesi. The pesi is one with the blade. So it's not pesi Ceblokan. And you can see again, because of time, that the palmer is on the blade. You see it? So the Chris from the time Majapahit, as I explained, for Javanese people, those are the most important Chris, you know, and everyone likes to have some of those Chris in their collection, because they're so powerful, they're so beautiful. They're not that beautiful because they're old, you know, they're worn out, but as I explained, those Chris are the most powerful Chris. Well, you see old pictures from my family over here, and this is a very important place for me. And of course, we have a long history in Java. And well, let me show you another Chris, also known Chris. And again, it has 3 look. It's not clear to see, but it has 3 look. 1, 2, 3. If you look at the gonjo again, you see the front going off, and it has a wavy gonjo, you know, and the gonjo is the kinetic energy. The energy is here. So when the gonjo is missing, you don't have the energy, because that's the part of Vishnu, the energy part, and that's the part of Shiva. Now, you've got a Pijitan over here, and you see that it has a very high lingam part over here. And in the middle, you see something like a chombong. Yeah. Well, you've got 3 types of chombong. The one who is made especially as chombong. The second one, when it has so much power that the power of the Chris pushes the metal apart. And the third part of the hole in the middle of the Chris is because of age. And if you're washing the Chris a lot, then suddenly you can see that the chombong is coming over here, you know. But this is not meant as a chombong. The chombong came out because of age, of the old age of the Keris. Well, you see some palmer here. You see here some palmer. It doesn't have a lot of palmer. Unfortunately, the mendak is new, but that happens a lot, you know. I also got a Keris over here, and also very, very, very old Keris. It doesn't have a mendak at all. Also very old, you see, with the small gonjo going forward. So again, Majapahit, there you go again. Not a lot of palmer on it. And what I will do is, when I find a good old one, I will replace it, but I got it like this. And so at this moment I keep it like this, because this is also pusaka, you know. I got this Keris just like this one also. I got it. And when you get something, you should not complain. It's how it is. So a lot of old Keris, parts are missing, but what you see with very good old Keris, you always recognize some old parts in the grip, the mendak, pendok, things like that. Well, let me show you another Keris, very old Majapahit Keris. Here you go. And again, the small pesi, a little bit of palmer here, a little bit of palmer here, but it's old, you know. And what you see is the center of the Keris. When an empu creates a Keris, he makes the center first and then the layers of the palmer on it. And what you see from the palmer is actually the nickel. And those very old Keris, they use the nickel from meteorites. Well, you don't need a lot of imagination to understand when a meteorite falls down on Earth. That's a gift from the cosmos. It is a gift from the cosmos. And you see in a lot of religions that meteorites are holy. Again, very, very old Keris. Also from Majapahit time, the beginning of time, you see. This Keris has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 look. And let's say 9, 11, 13 look, even 13 look are very precious Keris, because they come from somebody who has a very high ranking in the society of Java at that time. So again, Majapahit. This is also very interesting Keris. Also a small Keris, just like the other Keris from Majapahit. And if you look at the bases, but personally, it has all the looks of Majapahit. It has 15 look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. What's a very high number, you know. But if I check this part over here, it is an old Keris. And you can see the attachment here of the trunk to the blade. Beautiful Keris, beautiful Keris. But imagine the most looked after Keris are the Keris from Majapahit. It's an old Keris. You can see that the palmer is on the blade already. You see? Especially here you can see that the palmer is on the blade. It's not that smooth, but it's a little bit sharp over here. This part and the part over here. So this is a good example of a replica. Well, I call it a replica, but does it mean that the Keris is of a lower value? Of course not. Let's imagine, let's go back in time. It's 1800, and I go to an empu and I ask an empu, well, empu, can you please create a Keris for me? And empu says, okay, what do you like? Well, I like the Keris from Majapahit very much. And he takes the design of an old Keris and creates a Keris at this moment. He does it with all power, craftsmanship, spirituality that he has to create this Keris, because it's a beautiful made Keris. And after he's ready, he hands over the Keris to the one who bought the Keris, who ordered the Keris. And the spiritual power, even at that time, 1800, 1750, 1800, the empus still knew how to make magical blades. So for me it's very precious, because it's a Keris from my mother's family, from Uncle Herman. And it's a small Keris. It looks like Majapahit, but if you look how sharp it is, you can see that it's a replica. It's also very old. Maybe let's put it together with a real old, well, let's take the old Keris with the Gonjo Ceblokan. Then you can see difference, you know. It's not that brown anymore. Look at the trunk. Look at this trunk. It's sharper, you see, it's sharper, and now you can see the difference between a real Majapahit and a replica Majapahit. But maybe replica is not the correct name. And let me show another one, you know, the one with the twisted blade. Here, you can see the difference, you know.